Welcome to In-Silico Trials Real Impact, the In-Silico UK podcast that's revolutionizing the way we think about medical innovation. I'm Professor Alejandro Frangi from the University of Manchester, and I'll be your guide through this fascinating world of in-silico technologies. In each episode, we'll dive into cutting-edge research and groundbreaking news that are shaping the future of medical product development and regulation. From computational modeling to simulated clinical trials, we are exploring how digital approaches are transforming healthcare, making it safer, more efficient, more equitable, and incredibly precise. So, whether you're a researcher, regulator, a member of the public, or a patient representative, or simply curious about the future of medicine, tune in as we unravel the complex world of in-silico methods and their real-world impact. Get ready to discover how computer-simulated trials are leading to very real breakthroughs in patient care. In-Silico Trials Real Impact, where algorithms and data are saving lives. Let's begin.
Today we're diving into something that affects millions of people: brain aneurysms. You've sent us some really interesting research on a cutting-edge treatment called flow diversion. Specifically, we're going to be looking at how well the Pipeline Embolization Device, PED for short, works for aneurysms located on the posterior communicating artery, or PCOMI as it's called in the biz. And, well, it turns out that this treatment might not be a one-size-fits-all solution.
Right, and that's because the PCOMI, this is a critical pathway for blood flow in the brain. So treating aneurysms in this area, it requires a very delicate approach, to say the least. And using the PED for this specific type of aneurysm, we consider that off-label, which means that it's not yet been approved by the FDA for this specific purpose. That's where all this research you sent us comes in.
Exactly, and that makes it even more interesting to deep dive into. One of the big questions we're going to unpack today is whether having what's called fetal posterior circulation, FPC for short, affects how well this PED device actually works.
It's a crucial question. You see, FPC, that means there's a variation in how blood flow is routed within the brain. Think of it like this. With FPC, blood flow through the PCOMI is more like a raging river. Without it, it's more like a gentle stream.
Okay, I like that visual. That helps. So this difference in force, the raging river versus the gentle stream, that can impact how well the flow diverter works.
Yeah, precisely. And understanding that impact, well, that's a key part of what makes this research so fascinating.
So how did the researchers even go about studying this?
Well, that's what makes this research you sent over so interesting. It uses what we call in-silico trials.
In-silico trials. Okay, not signing up for that kind of medical trial anytime soon.
Yeah.
Are we talking computer simulations here?
Exactly. Instead of recruiting, hundreds of real patients, which, let's face it, can be incredibly expensive and really time-consuming, researchers in one of these studies, they created virtual patients.
Virtual patients, huh?
Yeah, 118 of them, using these really powerful computer models. Essentially, they're simulating how a flow diverter would work in all these different scenarios, but within these virtual patients.
So like a virtual operating room where they can just run endless experiments without any risk. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's a really useful tool for these researchers. Allows them to test things that just wouldn't be possible in a real trial, like, say, comparing different treatment approaches on the exact same aneurysm, or even, manipulating blood pressure to see how it affects those outcomes. Really interesting stuff.
And this isn't just like sci-fi futurism, right?
Yeah.
You sent over another study that actually took things a step further, using real patient data to validate these simulations.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. This study, it was published in the Journal of Neurointerv Surg, and they took data from actual patients with PCOMI aneurysms, virtually implanted these PEDs, and then, get this, they simulated what would happen under both normal blood pressure and high blood pressure conditions. They really put this model through its paces.
Wow, okay. And what they find? Did these virtual results, did they line up with what we see in actual patients?
Okay, so this is the really exciting part. The simulations, they remarkably mirrored what we've already seen in real clinical trials, which means that the model is incredibly reliable.
It's huge.
Huge deal for the future of these in-silico trials. It's basically proving that in many cases, these simulations, they can be just as good as the real thing, which opens the door to so many research possibilities.
Yeah. That's incredible. So much faster, I imagine, less expensive than traditional clinical trials. But let's get back to how this relates to, the listeners' questions. We've been talking about this raging river versus gentle stream difference in blood flow with FPC. did these in silico trials actually tell us anything about how that impacts the effectiveness of flow diverters? So did these in silico trials tell us anything about how that raging river versus gentle stream idea impacts how well these flow diverters work?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. They found that in these simulations, the patients with FTC, they had, significantly lower success rates with the PED compared to those without it.
Okay, so how much lower are we talking?
Like we're talking a 67.8% reduction in aneurysm blood flow for those without FPC,
Okay.
compared to only 46.5% for those with it.
Wow, that E is a big difference.
Yeah, it really highlights how important it is to consider that FPC when doctors are making those treatment decisions.
Yeah, for sure. So it's not just about whether or not, technically a flow diverter can be placed. It's about really understanding how each individual patient's anatomy, that whole raging river of blood flow thing, might impact how well that device actually works for them in the long run.
Precisely. And this is where those in silico trials get really, really interesting. They're not just, advancing science, they're potentially improving healthcare equity by providing really crucial insights that are relevant to, specific groups of people.
Okay, I see what you mean. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? What do you mean by improving healthcare equity in this case?
Well, so studies have actually shown that FTC is more prevalent in Black patients. So these findings about FPC, they have really important implications for how doctors approach treatment decisions for, this specific patient population.
Absolutely. That's a really important point to consider, personalized medicine. Medicine tailored to an individual's anatomy and even their background. I mean, that can really lead to better outcomes for everyone.
Definitely.
And of course, like any good deep dive, this one leaves us with maybe even more questions than we started with.
Always.
For example, the studies did say that the simulations only looked at the immediate effects on blood flow, right? They didn't look at how blood vessels might change over a longer period of time, which, of course, that's a key factor to think about with aneurysm treatment.
Absolutely, you're right. More research is always needed, especially to be sure that these findings from the in silico trials, they hold true in those diverse real-world patients.
Yeah, good point. And just to be super clear for our listeners, flow diversion, that's not the only option for treating these aneurysms.
Yeah.
What are some of the other ways doctors might treat these, particularly for people who have FPC where the PED might not be as effective?
Right. There are some other options. There's coiling, where they actually insert these tiny platinum coils, and that blocks off the aneurysm so blood can't get in there.
Okay.
And then there's also stent-assisted coiling, which combines a stent for support with the coils to make that aneurysm even more secure.
So a lot to consider and discuss with your doctor if you're facing this diagnosis. And that brings us to our final thought for you, dear listener. This research really drives home the point that personalized medicine is so important. If you were dealing with a PCOMA aneurysm diagnosis, what would you want to know? What questions would you ask your doctor? What factors would be most important to you in figuring out the best path forward? We hope this deep dive has given you the knowledge and maybe even a little more confidence to really be involved in those healthcare decisions.
Absolutely. It's a conversation worth having for sure.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you so much for joining us. And don't forget to check out the show notes. We'll have links there to the research papers, all the good stuff we talked about today, other resources we mentioned. And until next time, keep diving deeper, everybody.